Danielle's heart pounded as Elias stood before the judge, calm but unyielding, his voice slicing through the courtroom like a blade. "We are here to uphold the Constitution, Your Honor. And right now, this courtroom is failing it." Judge Kane's gavel slammed down, but the room had already shifted, because for the first time, the system was the one on trial. It was supposed to be simple, just 10 minutes inside Value Plus, grab a notebook, and head home before dinner. But by the time Danielle Harris stepped outside again, her wrists were red and sore from zip ties, her cheeks wet with silent tears, and her world forever tilted on its axis. It was a Thursday afternoon in Mesa, Arizona. The sun burned high above the flat, dusty parking lot as Danielle pushed open the glass doors of Value Plus Discount Outlet. Her backpack was already falling apart. One strap had given out during second period, spilling her government notes all over the school hallway. Finals were next week, and she needed something cheap but sturdy. Her mother had told her that morning not to spend more than $15 and had half-joked, "Stay out of trouble, okay, baby?" Danielle had smiled and promised, as always. She was 16. A junior. Smart. Polite. Meticulous with her planner. She had just been accepted into NYU's summer program for young leaders in social justice. She had a future, and she guarded it like something sacred. Inside, the store was loud and a little chaotic. A baby cried in one aisle, someone's ringtone kept going off in another, and the scent of stale mop water clung to the air. Danielle moved quickly, found a navy blue notebook with a reinforced spine, and headed toward the front of the store. She didn't notice the man in the red vest watching her from across the room. Not yet. She got in line and took out her phone, scrolling through her messages. Her friend Tasha had just texted her about their upcoming student council fundraiser. Danielle was tapping a reply when someone touched her shoulder, firm, abrupt. "Excuse me," the man said. "I need you to come with me." Danielle turned around slowly. The man was white, middle-aged, with a shaved head and faded tattoos peeking out from beneath his sleeves. His red vest had manager stitched into the chest. His face was tight with accusation. Why?" Danielle asked, confused. "We got a report you were seen putting merchandise into your bag," he said flatly. Danielle blinked. "What? No, I didn't." "Let's take this to the back room," he said, louder this time, already motioning for a teenage employee nearby to watch the register. Heads began to turn. Danielle felt the sting of eyes, the heavy silence that followed public accusation. Her heart pounded. She followed him, unsure of what else to do. Her skin prickled with heat and shame. They passed two customers who gave her that look, that silent, knowing judgment. The look that said figures. The back office was cramped and smelled like reheated food and printer ink. He shut the door behind them. "Empty your bag and pockets," he ordered. Danielle's hands trembled. She did as she was told. Out came her phone, a half-used chapstick, her student ID, the notebook she hadn't yet purchased, still with the Value Plus sticker on it. That was it. The manager frowned, like he was disappointed there wasn't more. "I still need to call the police," he said. Danielle's voice caught. "Wait, why? I didn't do anything. Store policy. You were reported. They'll sort it out." She wanted to scream, but all that came out was a choked, "Please." But he had already picked up the phone. Danielle sat frozen, her notebook sitting between them like a guilty object. 15 minutes later, the officer arrived, a younger guy, maybe late 20s. His eyes softened a little when he saw her. "I'm sorry about this," he said gently as he reached for his cuffs. "I just have to follow procedure." "Please," Danielle whispered, "I'm not a thief." He cuffed her anyway. She sat in the back of the patrol car, her head resting against the cold glass, staring out at the people walking in and out of the store like nothing had happened. Like her life wasn't shattering into tiny, irretrievable pieces. At the station, they booked her for petty theft. Took her fingerprints. Made her pose for a mugshot. She was released hours later to her parents, who stood at the desk looking like someone had sucked the air from their lungs. Her mom barely spoke the whole drive home. Her dad just kept muttering, "We'll get this sorted, baby. Don't worry." But Danielle wasn't listening. Her future, NYU, pre-law, scholarships, flashed in her mind like falling dominoes. They found her a public defender through a local legal aid office. A man named Doug Mullins, with a coffee-stained tie and the demeanor of someone who had long stopped caring. He called the incident unfortunate but common, said it would likely get dismissed with time. Just show up. Be respectful. Don't cause a scene. Danielle wanted to believe him, but her instincts buzzed with dread. 2 weeks later, they walked into Maricopa County Courthouse, an imposing sandstone building with sun-bleached columns and metal detectors at every entrance. Danielle wore her best church dress and clutched a folder of letters from her teachers and her student council advisor. Her hands shook. In courtroom 3B, she first laid eyes on Judge Meredith Kane. Kane looked like she'd been carved from salt rock, sharp lines, sharp stare. She didn't even glance up when Danielle's case was called. Mullins stood and mumbled something about Danielle's good character. Mentioned the security footage he planned to request. Mentioned how the item hadn't left the store. How the police report had no detail. How the manager never actually saw the alleged theft. Judge Kane didn't care. She cut him off. "Based on the report, there is sufficient probable cause for a felony charge," she said. "We will proceed to trial." Danielle's ears rang. Felony? Her chest tightened like a vice. Mullins didn't object. He just nodded and sat down. Judge Kane looked bored. Unmoved. She set cash bail at $5,000. Danielle turned in her seat to see her mom whispering, panicked, to her dad about savings accounts and credit cards. Her dad had gone pale. Her mom looked like she might throw up. Danielle felt like a ghost in her own life. Outside the courtroom, Mullins mumbled something about appealing the bail, maybe getting a deal later. Danielle didn't hear him. She pulled out her phone with numb fingers and typed a single message. "Elias, it's happening. I need you." She hit send. She didn't expect a reply so fast. "Stay put. Don't sign anything. I'm calling someone right now." Danielle exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The courthouse bustled around her, lawyers chatting over coffee, security guards joking about their weekends, clerks hauling paperwork like none of it mattered. Like she didn't matter. But Elias was watching now. And Elias didn't play by their rules. She slid her phone back into her purse and leaned against the wall, staring up at the ceiling tiles like they might fall and crush her. Part of her wanted them to. Just to end this sick dream. She didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath Judge Kane's courtroom was already starting to crack. And when Elias Grant moved, entire systems had a habit of falling. Danielle was still leaning against the cold courthouse wall when her phone buzzed again. The message was short, but it carried weight like thunder. "Kendra Moss will be there in 30 minutes. Don't move. We're not letting this slide." She stared at the screen, her fingers tightening around the device as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had just crumbled beneath her feet. Elias didn't waste time, and that was the first flicker of hope she'd felt in days. Exactly 27 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she belonged in a D.C. war room, not a drab county courthouse. Kendra Moss wore a navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, her dark locks pulled into a low bun. Her walk was precise, her eyes sharp and scanning. She spotted Danielle in seconds and approached like she already knew the story. "Danielle Harris?" Her voice was calm, even. Danielle nodded, trying not to cry again. "I'm Kendra. Your brother sent me. I need to hear everything." They found a corner of the courthouse cafeteria. Kendra didn't waste time on niceties. She listened with the kind of focus that made Danielle feel, for the first time, like someone actually believed her. Danielle's mother and father joined in, their voices still brittle with fear. Kendra took notes, asked follow-ups, jotted down names: Rick Langston, Judge Kane, Officer Devers. When Danielle mentioned the denied surveillance footage, Kendra's jaw visibly tightened. That footage would have cleared you? Yes, Danielle said without hesitation. I never even left the notebook aisle. Kendra closed her notebook. Then we've got a problem. And your brother hates problems that wear robes. As Kendra stepped away to make a call, Danielle watched her with a strange mix of admiration and disbelief. This woman hadn't known her 20 minutes ago, and now she was treating her like someone worth fighting for. When Kendra returned, her voice was lower, more urgent. Elias already has a team digging into Judge Meredith Kane's record. Early signs? It's not good. Multiple sealed complaints, all minority defendants, all buried before they saw sunlight. This isn't just about you, Danielle. It's about a pattern. Danielle felt the breath catch in her throat. She'd known this was wrong. But now it wasn't just her gut telling her so, it was evidence. Pattern. Practice. Power. By late afternoon, a formal emergency motion had been filed. Kendra moved fast, submitting documentation to compel the release of the Value Plus surveillance footage, citing obstruction and due process violations. The courthouse clerk, a woman named Marcia with tight lips and wary eyes, didn't like surprises. But Kendra leaned over the desk, lowered her voice, and said something Danielle couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it made Marcia's face pale as she took the file and walked away without another word. Outside, a dark SUV pulled up near the courthouse steps. Elias Grant stepped out without fanfare. No security detail. No entourage. Just a black leather briefcase and a storm brewing behind his eyes. Danielle saw him through the window and nearly ran outside. He didn't say anything at first, he just hugged her, firm and fierce, like he'd flown across the country fueled by fury alone. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner, he said quietly. But I'm here now. And we're going to make this right. Inside Judge Kane's chambers, the walls were beginning to close in. She'd received word that the DOJ was now watching her courtroom. That same morning, Kendra had tipped off a local journalist, an old colleague from her investigative days, who started sniffing around old case files. When Danielle walked into the courtroom 2 days later, the seats weren't just filled with quiet onlookers anymore. There were reporters. Notepads. Whispered questions. Cameras outside. Judge Kane's face was more rigid than before, her voice clipped and hostile. We are here for a preliminary hearing in the matter of the state of Arizona versus Danielle Harris. But the room didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the truth. Elias stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and spoke with unshakable authority. Your Honor, the defense moves for immediate dismissal of charges based on suppressed exculpatory evidence, racial bias in courtroom proceedings, and a direct pattern of judicial misconduct tied to your past rulings. The courtroom went still. Judge Kane narrowed her eyes. You're not on record as counsel. Elias didn't blink. I represent the United States Department of Justice. The silence cracked like glass. Kane stiffened. Kendra stood next to him, holding a binder thick with sealed complaints, affidavits, and case summaries, all pointing at the same disturbing trend. Judge Kane's courtroom had long been a funnel for unjust rulings, particularly targeting Black and Latino youth. Kane tried to regain control. These are irrelevant to the matter at hand. We are here to discuss, Elias interrupted her without raising his voice. We are here to uphold the Constitution, Your Honor. And right now, this courtroom is failing it. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Kane's gavel came down hard. Enough. The motion is under review. Court is adjourned until further notice. She stormed from the bench so quickly her robe billowed behind her like smoke. Outside, the storm had already spread. News outlets picked up the thread. By sundown, #JusticeForDanielle was trending on social media. Local parents shared their own stories online. One woman posted about her son who'd been sentenced by Judge Kane for a minor school fight. Another shared that her nephew had been denied evidence review despite having a clear alibi. The walls Judge Kane built to keep the truth out were beginning to crumble, and they weren't going to hold. Later that night, as the courthouse lights dimmed, Elias held a press briefing on the courthouse steps. Microphones crowded around him like vines. What happened to Danielle Harris isn't rare. That's the tragedy. It's the system working exactly as it was designed to work, for some and not for others. But today, we're here to say that system is on notice. The Department of Justice is conducting a full review of judicial practices in Maricopa County. We will no longer tolerate the quiet destruction of our youth in rooms where no one is watching. Now we're watching. Danielle stood beside him, the Arizona sunset casting long shadows across her face. She didn't speak. Not yet. But she stood tall, chin high, hand steady. The courtroom hadn't broken her. It had built something inside her instead, something quiet and powerful and unwilling to disappear. She had been called a criminal. She had been denied her voice. But now the whole country was listening. Judge Kane issued a statement the next morning, calling the DOJ's involvement political theater. She accused Elias of abusing power and Kendra of manufacturing outrage. But her words fell flat. The evidence Kendra and Elias uncovered was damning. Kane's rulings showed a clear trend, dismissing evidence that supported minority defendants, denying motions without hearings, and handing out sentences that far exceeded state norms for first-time offenses. 10 days later, Meredith Kane resigned under pressure. Danielle watched it happen on a small TV in her school's counseling office. Her guidance counselor sat next to her, stunned. "You did that," she whispered. Danielle didn't smile. She just nodded once, slow and deliberate. "No," she said softly. "We did that." But she knew, even in that moment, that this wasn't an ending. It was the start of something bigger. Something louder. Something irreversible. Her voice had cracked the silence. And now it was echoing. The guidance counselor's television still buzzed in the background as Danielle sat motionless, staring at the image of Judge Meredith Kane resigning from the bench she once ruled like a fortress. The cheering at the bottom of the screen read, "Maricopa County Judge resigns amid DOJ probe." Her counselor whispered something like, "You must feel relieved," but Danielle didn't answer. Relief wasn't the right word. Not after what had happened. Not after watching her life nearly slip away beneath someone else's gavel. What she felt was a slow-burning fire in her chest, steady, painful, necessary. A reckoning had begun, and she knew it wouldn't end just because one judge stepped down. Kane was a symptom. The sickness went deeper. Within 48 hours, a task force from the Department of Justice began auditing over 24 past cases from Judge Kane's courtroom. The patterns were horrifying. Teenagers, mostly Black or Latino, pushed through hearings without proper defense. Evidence ignored. Probation denied. Sentences inflated. Elias, still in Arizona, took meetings every day with families who had once thought they were alone. Danielle accompanied him to 2 of them, quietly listening as mothers and brothers and uncles recounted nearly identical stories to her own. She didn't speak much, just nodded, took notes, and sat with them in their pain. They didn't need a hero. They needed someone who had been there, someone who could say, without blinking, "You're not crazy. This happened to me too." While Elias worked with the DOJ and local advocacy groups, he also quietly used his connections to build something more lasting. The Legal Empowerment Initiative, funded in part through his own firm, was launched just 12 days after Danielle's case was dismissed. It provided legal education, court support, and access to real attorneys for young people of color throughout Arizona. No billboards. No ribbon cuttings. Just work. That was Elias's way. Danielle volunteered twice a week. She answered phones. She organized paperwork. She sat beside scared kids in waiting rooms and told them how to breathe through the anxiety. It felt good to do something. To not feel powerless. But she still had moments, late at night or early in the morning, when fear gripped her chest like a cold hand. When she remembered the click of the cuffs, the look in the store manager's eyes, the flat apathy on Judge Kane's face. Those things didn't disappear just because headlines changed. But what did change was Danielle herself. Something in her spine had straightened. Something in her voice had deepened. By the time her school counselor invited her to speak at a citywide youth forum, she didn't hesitate. She stood on a stage in front of 200 high school students and told them the truth, not just about what happened to her, but about what could happen to any of them if they didn't know their rights, if they didn't believe their voice mattered. "The system counts on your silence," she said. "Don't give it what it wants." That speech led to another. And another. Within 6 weeks, Danielle had spoken at 5 high schools, 2 churches, and 1 juvenile detention center. She didn't speak like someone trying to be famous. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't wear pearls or rehearse a script. She just told her story. And it landed like thunder every time. Her mother started saving newspaper clippings and taping them to the fridge. Her father, usually quiet and stoic, started driving her to every event, waiting in the car with a thermos of coffee and eyes that brimmed with pride. NYU reached out again, not only reaffirming her summer scholarship but offering her additional funding through their Civil Justice Fellowship. The letter came on a Wednesday, tucked in a pale blue envelope with her name written in crisp ink. She opened it in silence, read it twice, then passed it across the table to Elias. He didn't say anything. He just smiled and tapped the table like it was a victory. Buzzer. The night before she left for New York, Danielle couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, watching the shadows move across her backyard, listening to the soft hum of desert wind. There was still one thing left to do. She took a breath, picked up her phone, and dialed a number she never thought she'd use again. Judge Meredith Kane answered after 3 rings. The silence that followed was thick and awkward. Danielle could hear the faint echo of television in the background. "Hello?" Kane's voice was rougher than she remembered. Smaller. Danielle didn't flinch. "It's Danielle Harris." Another pause. Then the sound of the TV cutting off. "I wasn't expecting. I'm not calling for an apology," Danielle said calmly. "And I'm not calling to scream at you either. I just need to say one thing." Kane didn't respond. Danielle continued. "You tried to erase me. You tried to take away something I worked my whole life for. And for a minute, I really thought you did. But I'm still here. You lost." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Kane said, quietly, "You don't understand how this system works." Danielle almost laughed. "I understand more than you ever wanted me to." She hung up. That moment stayed with her, not because it gave her peace, but because it made something crystal clear. People like Kane would never admit what they did. The system wouldn't collapse just because it was exposed. But change didn't need permission. It needed persistence. It needed voices that wouldn't go quiet again. Weeks later, Danielle stood outside her NYU dorm with 2 bags, one filled with clothes, the other with handwritten letters from students and parents and strangers who had followed her story and written her notes that began with "You gave me hope." She walked the city with new purpose. Her name didn't trend anymore. The headlines had faded. But what remained was the fire. The unshakable truth that her life was hers again, and no courtroom, no judge, no bias would define her story. She wasn't naive. She knew the fight wasn't over. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Not anymore. And neither was anyone else willing to stand up and be seen. Because once you find your voice, the world never sounds the same again. And Danielle Harris had found hers. Danielle Harris's story is not just about one teenager falsely accused. It's about an entire system that too often looks at young black lives and sees guilt before innocence, noise before potential, threat before truth. It's a story that exposes how quickly everything you've worked for can be taken from you, not because of what you've done, but because of what you represent to someone else's prejudice. As the author of this story, what struck me most wasn't just Danielle's fear, it was her strength. In the face of humiliation, injustice, and public silence, she chose not to vanish. She didn't let her voice be stolen, even when the system tried to bury it beneath a label she didn't deserve. So what can we take away from her journey? First, your silence does not protect you. When Danielle finally spoke, when she called her brother, told her story, stood on stages, her voice became power. Injustice thrives in quiet corners. It counts on your exhaustion, your disbelief, your fear. But the moment you decide to speak, to push back, the ground begins to shift. Second, justice doesn't happen on its own. It took her brother, a federal attorney. It took a fearless investigator. It took community pressure, media attention, legal filings, and relentless advocacy. One person can spark change, but lasting reform takes all of us. It takes asking hard questions, demanding accountability, and refusing to look the other way. Third, healing isn't always loud. Danielle didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't want to be a symbol. But by simply telling the truth, by showing up and helping others find their voice, she changed lives, including her own. Healing came not from revenge, but from reclaiming her story. To every young person listening, know your rights. Trust your instincts. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. You matter. And your story is worth defending. And to those who feel like the world has tried to erase them, remember Danielle's words, "You tried to erase me. But I'm still here." That resilience, that fire, is how we begin to rebuild what's broken. From all of us here at US Instructive Stories, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't fight louder, it's stand longer. Stay strong. Stay seen. And never forget, your voice can shake the walls of any courtroom.